This is the story of a shredded seating chart, a heavily guarded civilian entrance, and the precise moment Queen Camilla realized that wearing a crown does not grant you passage into the sacred territory of the true bloodline. In less than 24 hours, what began as an arrogant attempt to hijack the most high-profile royal family gathering of the year ended in a devastating, highly visible retreat. When she walked toward the Grand Marquis at Gatcombe Park following the wedding of Princess Anne's son, fully expecting to lead her non-royal children to the absolute center of the Windsor dynasty, she found her carefully engineered social matrix entirely dismantled. Her family had been relegated to the civilian periphery, stripped of all VIP status. In that singular freezing second, the illusion of her absolute power collapsed, forcing her to flee the estate under the humiliating fabricated cover of an urgent scheduling conflict. What this video will unpack is the anatomy of a silent, ruthless institutional retaliation on home soil. We are going to examine the secret social power grab Camilla attempted during the June 2026 wedding of Peter Phillips to Harriet Spurling, exploiting a private family celebration to artificially elevate her own bloodline. We will explore how the Princess Royal, acting as the ultimate uncompromising matriarch of her own domain, forensically uncovered this maneuver. Most importantly, we will reveal the brutal administrative checkmate Princess Anne executed, delivering a staggering psychological blow to Camilla. By the end of this analysis, you will understand the terrifying truth that has left the Queen Consort paralyzed. She may share the King's bed and wear the state jewels, but she holds absolutely no structural authority over the authentic royal family. To understand why this trap snapped shut with such devastating precision, we first have to rebuild the towering illusion of absolute power Camilla has constructed over the last 3 decades. For years, she executed a masterclass in psychological endurance and political maneuvering. She absorbed the public hatred, survived the darkest media storms, and meticulously transformed herself from the ultimate outsider into the anointed Queen Consort. Following the transition of power, her survival instinct morphed into a dangerous sense of total ownership. She began to view the institution not as a historic trust guarded by blood, but as a blended family business ready to be reorganized according to her private designs. We saw the signs early on. There was the subtle erasure of Princess Diana's historical footprint, the quiet insertion of her own companions into the royal machinery, and the aggressive push to elevate her children Tom and Laura. Camilla believed she had King Charles completely controlled. In her mind, the king's authority was her authority. She assumed that her elevation to the throne room meant she had automatically conquered the internal social hierarchy of the Windsor family. She looked at the fractured palace landscape, saw Catherine operating with quiet restraint, and believed she was completely, undeniably untouchable. She assumed that wherever the king went, her rules would automatically dictate the environment. But that is where the story changes, because absolute power often breeds a fatal kind of arrogance. And Camilla's arrogance led her to cross the one invisible line that the true heirs of the bloodline had sworn to defend with their lives. She attempted to exert her authority inside the absolute sovereign territory of the Princess Royal. The trigger for this crisis was not a grand public declaration, but a quiet, deeply cynical administrative maneuver centered around the June the 6th wedding of Peter Phillips. For the British monarchy, a family wedding of this scale is a massive convergence of media, aristocracy, and institutional power. Camilla knew that the cameras would be watching, and she saw an opportunity for a spectacular display of social dominance. What appears to be true based on the frantic shifting of estate logistics is that Camilla's camp quietly submitted a revised, highly aggressive seating matrix for the private reception at Gatcombe Park. The plan was as subtle as it was insidious. Camilla sought to systematically displace the blood royals and the bride's family to elevate her own. She requisitioned the primary center tables surrounding the king for her own children and associates, attempting to frame the Parker Bowles faction as the new epicenter of the modern monarchy. She even attempted to route their arrival through the heavily guarded private sovereign entrances, bypassing the standard guest protocols. It was a staggering exploitation of protocol, a maneuver born of commercial desperation. Camilla possesses no vast historical estates of her own to host such grand displays. Her personal status is entirely dependent on her proximity to Charles. She realized that by hijacking the visual real estate of Anne's family event, she could artificially inflate her standing and broadcast to the world that her bloodline had finally conquered the old guard. That detail matters, Camilla calculated that Princess Anne would be too distracted by the emotional and logistical chaos of hosting her son's wedding to notice a bureaucratic adjustment to a marquee floor plan. She assumed that by framing the revised matrix as a royal directive from the Queen's office, the estate planners would quietly rubber stamp the paperwork, but she fundamentally misunderstood the ruthless institutional discipline of the Princess Royal. Princess Anne did not find out through palace gossip. She found out because Gatcombe Park is her absolute domain. It is an estate she owns outright unburdened by the diplomatic compromises of Buckingham Palace or the Duchy of Cornwall. Anne operates her territory with the precision of a military commander. When the revised seating ledgers and security clearance requests crossed the desks of her private estate managers, the calculated elevation of the Queen Consort's family was immediately flagged and brought directly to her. What Princess Anne discovered was a calculated insult to the authentic lineage of the late Queen Elizabeth II. Camilla was utilising a grey area in her title to quietly downgrade blood royals to secondary status on their own land. Anne recognised that if Camilla was permitted to dictate the internal social boundaries of Gatcombe Park, the sanctity of the family's private hierarchy would be permanently broken. It was a direct threat to the pristine preservation of the monarchy's core identity, and so the Princess Royal did not scream. She did not confront Camilla in the halls of Windsor. She did not run to the tabloid press to leak stories of internal warfare. She weaponized her absolute territorial sovereignty. The execution of the retaliation was a masterclass in cold institutional warfare. Working in silent alignment with Prince William and Anne allowed the illusion to continue just long enough for the trap to be inescapable. They let Camilla's aides finalize their bespoke wardrobes. They let her family prepare their grand entrances. They let Camilla attend the church service at Kemble, smiling for the cameras and believing that the ultimate social takeover of the reception was only hours away. And then the invisible hand of the true bloodline moved, utilizing her unappealable authority as the host and the matriarch of the estate. Princess Anne initiated a brutal comprehensive correction of the reception logistics. She invoked strict, uncompromising security and protocol guidelines regarding who is legally permitted inside the sovereign cordon. The ledgers were locked. The original floor plans honouring the direct line of succession and the bride's family were flawlessly restored. What looked like a routine administrative update was actually a total dismantling of Camilla's authority. The directives issued by the Queen's office were quietly marked as unauthorised and shredded. When Camilla arrived at the Gatcombe Park reception, anticipating a triumphant march to the centre table, the reality of her defeat was laid bare in black and white. The security officers at the primary sovereign entrance respectfully but firmly redirected her non-royal family members to the standard civilian doors. The VIP access passes had been revoked. When she finally entered the marquee, she saw the undeniable visual hierarchy. The centre of gravity belonged entirely to Princess Anne, Prince William and Catherine. Camilla's family had not just been removed from the primary circle, they had been entirely relegated to the secondary peripheral tables reserved for extended civilian guests. The humiliation was immediate and entirely invisible to the public eye, which is what makes it so psychologically damaging. Camilla sat at her assigned place, the illusion of her absolute power shattering around her. She had pushed for total institutional control, and in doing so, she had handed Princess Anne the exact justification needed to expose her true status. The side doors were bolted, the social access was revoked. The reality of her commercial desperation was laid bare for the entire aristocracy to see. Trapped, deeply humiliated, and suddenly realizing the terrifying extent of the territorial wall built against her, Camilla reached for her husband, the king, desperately expecting him to save her empire from the cold fury of the Princess Royal. The look that passed between Queen Camilla and King Charles in that heavily guarded moment was one of profound, unspoken calculation. She stood before the man who had redefined the parameters of his entire life to place her on the throne, silently demanding that he exercise his sovereign authority to reverse the humiliation. She expected him to override his sister to demand a realignment of the seating matrix, and to restore the Parker Bowles family to the centre of the Gatcombe Park reception. But as the king looked at the rewritten ledger and the stark boundary drawn by the Princess Royal, he did something that signalled the absolute twilight of his own domestic dominance. He looked away. That devastating silence from the monarch was the true psychological climax of the entire weekend. Charles did not offer a defence of his wife's ambitions, nor did he spark a public confrontation with his sister at her own son's wedding. Instead, he quietly accepted the reality that within the boundaries of Gatcombe Park, the authority of Princess Anne is absolute. The King of the United Kingdom burdened by ongoing health challenges and acutely aware of the fragility of his transitional reign, chose the structural stability of his family bloodline over the social vanity of his consort. For Camilla, the realization was chilling. The ultimate shield she had relied upon for 30 years, the absolute devotion of Charles, was no longer strong enough to protect her from the cold calculations of the true heirs. To understand the sheer desperation driving this hidden conflict, one must look past the public facades and examine the brutal architecture of royal survival. The public frequently mistakes the opulence of the Queen's title for the possession of permanent institutional wealth. In reality, Camilla operates in a state of profound commercial vulnerability. She owns no sovereign estates. She holds no independent historical titles that will outlive her husband's reign. Unlike Prince William, who inherited a multi-billion-dollar empire the moment Queen Elizabeth passed, or Princess Anne, who holds her private estates outright. Camilla's entire royal status is essentially a temporary lease tied directly to the breath in Charles's lungs. The moment the crown transitions to the next generation, Camilla's institutional relevance ceases instantly. She will become the Dowager Queen, living entirely at the financial and logistical mercy of King William. He will control the palaces she is permitted to inhabit, the security details assigned to protect her, and the discretionary allowances that fund her lifestyle. Her aggressive attempt to hijack the seating arrangements at Peter Phillips's wedding was a frantic, calculated maneuver to establish a visual precedent of social equivalence for her children before that clock runs out. She was trying to force the aristocracy to accept her family as permanent peers of the bloodline, precisely because she knows they possess no structural right to remain in that circle once Charles is gone. But the coalition of the true bloodline, spearheaded by Princess Anne and fortified by Prince William, has effectively placed the Queen Consort in a velvet straitjacket. They understand that true power does not require theatrical arguments, it requires the ruthless enforcement of the administrative boundaries. By removing the Parker Bowles faction from the sovereign circle at Gatcombe Park, Anne did not merely protect a wedding layout. She drew an unyielding line between the temporary companions of the reigning monarch and the permanent heirs to the British crown. It was a clear, unmistakable message to the wider court that the future of the institution belongs exclusively to the legitimate bloodline. This structural realignment is where the quiet, enduring presence of Catherine, the Princess of Wales, carries its most devastating weight. While Camilla is forced to scheme in the shadows for guest clearances and table placements, Catherine commands the absolute loyalty of the institution without uttering a single word. Her position is structurally absolute. She does not need a rewritten protocol to justify her presence at the center of gravity. At the reception, while Camilla's inner circle was relegated to the civilian periphery, Catherine occupied her rightful place beside William, effortlessly embodying the sovereign continuity that the aristocracy instinctively respects. Every gesture from the courtiers, every subtle deference from the family, proved that the court has already read the room and looked toward the future. The ultimate irony of Camilla's 30-year campaign is that she has achieved the title she sacrificed her reputation to claim, only to discover that the prize is entirely hollow. She manipulated the press, outlasted the public outrage, and successfully erased historical footprints to secure her place inside Westminster Abbey. Yet as she stood inside the Gatcombe Park marquee, watching her family use the civilian exits while the blood royals occupied the sovereign enclosure, the illusion evaporated completely. She is a queen in name, operating within a system that has quietly forensically neutralized her capacity to alter its destiny. The official public relations narrative broadcast to the media claimed that the king and queen departed the wedding festivities early due to a pressing state schedule. It was a polished, necessary lie designed to preserve the dignified image of the monarchy. But for the seasoned observers inside the palace walls, the truth was undeniable. Camilla chose to withdraw entirely, rather than endure the visible humiliation of sitting at a secondary table while the family she tried to displace ruled the room. Her abrupt exit was not an act of statecraft, it was the desperate retreat of a strategist who realized her hands had been completely removed from the steering wheel. William and Anne's silent execution of discipline has rewritten the rules of engagement within the House of Windsor. They have proven that they do not need to generate tabloid scandals to defeat an adversary. They simply lock the ledger, enforce the protocol, and let the cold reality of the institution do the rest. The era of unchecked manipulation has reached its definitive boundary. Camilla may sit beside the king on the public stage, but the true heirs have made it clear that she is merely a guest in a house owned by the future. If you found this forensic analysis into the hidden power dynamics of the royal family insightful, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. We will continue to follow this unprecedented transition of power and bring you the truth behind the palace walls. Thank you for watching, and we will see you in the next one.